Howdy everybody out there in YouTube land. Welcome back to the channel. So today I have a wonderful session planned for us. We're going to be talking about the 3 P's of success, as defined by me of course, but also a bunch of other people. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into some concepts that are in the Maximum Entertainment 2.0 by Ken Weber. So one of the first things I need to get off my chest is this. My magic sucks. It's terrible. It's horrible. There's very little about my magic that I would find compelling to myself, let alone to you guys. Some of you may watch out of compassion for the craft. Others may watch because you find a spark of something in there, which I hope that spark can become a wildfire someday. And that is the confidence that I have to continue doing what I do so that I may become better. So let's talk about what it means in terms of magic, right? Whenever you have cards or coins or whatnot, what are you doing, right? You have a puzzle. The puzzling part of it is for the spectator. I am creating a moment that allows you to seek some type of knowledge, right? So if I were to say I'm going to take the 5 of clubs and I'm going to lose it somewhere into the pack, and that 5 stays on top, there's a puzzle there when I reveal it to come from the center. So how does that work? So there's the puzzle, is that first part. The second part is me doing a trick, which is me trying to fool you in some way. The puzzle is you trying to figure it out. But when you put it together, that's where the performance comes. And that is when you create a magical moment. And that's the third thing. And that's what we all seek to do. We seek to provide a puzzle to you by tricking you. And then we want to create a magical moment that accentuates our craft beyond all of that, so that you can have enjoyment and entertainment. And how do we do that? How do we do that? Practice, practice, practice. Over and over and over again. We will shuffle over and over and over again. All of these things we do 100 times before we turn on the camera, so that we can perform something once. At a time, anyway. Because if we love what we do, we continue to do it. So let's go back to the idea. The pyramid that is contained into this book here is the pyramid that states, and this is statistics, and it's unfortunate. Some people, Magic in Mind was a book that we recently acquired as a PDF. And there's a lot of different contributors, magic individuals of this time period that contributed to that book and to the essays contained within it. It's really kind of like a magical Bible for magicians. Very little tricks in there, very little magic per se, but the magic is in the words. The magic is in the understanding from the experts in the field. Here is the triangle here. If you can, my lighting's pretty bad right here. So at the top you have perfect magicians. Perfect doesn't mean that they're always great, but it means that people have mastered the craft. Then you have this small section here, which is for people that maybe are semi-professional, that do it well enough that they can be considered decent. And then you have most of us down here. And I know I'm down there. I for sure 100% know I'm down there, and I admit to that. Because I do magic as a hobby, and that's what it says, hobbyist. Very rarely will they go up to the next tier. It could take me a lifetime. In order to get better, I'll use an example. So let's say you're learning a foreign language. Well, my Spanish teacher in college said, you can be well enough at vernacular dictation, you can speak it and you can write it, and you can be pretty good for an English-speaking Spanish. But in order for you to truly learn the language, you need to immerse yourself in the culture, and you need to go someplace where that's all they're speaking, because then you can't rely on your English to convert it to Spanish. You have to actually learn the Spanish in here. Very beautiful. Same thing with magic. So many people that I've talked to who have become professional magicians have a story. It's not as always cut and dry as I quit my job and became a magician. It has happened, but there's a process that they have to follow. And basically that process it comes up in their mind. They're like, I perform magic and I love what I do here, but I have a day job. And at some point in time, I had a choice between pursuing this or continuing with this. And I decided we're going to forego the day job and we're going to just do magic. And now they're professionals. But does that mean everybody succeeds? No, because you have to go back to these things here in order to be successful. But it's not just about that. It's about learning how to do these things in a way that's going to be compelling to you, the audience. So when you practice, you have to practice to get good. You have to practice to perfect your craft. And it's not just about doing the trick. I can very easily shuffle up this deck. I can have a card selected for you here today. That'll be the Queen of Spades. It goes in there, and the Queen is not on top. No, the Queen is not on top. It's in the air here somewhere, because magic exists in your mind. Okay? You got to practice these things to a level that there is just no... This is where the performance is happening between you and I. I'm some guy on camera talking to you right now. The way that I'm talking, the way that I'm speaking, the way that I'm dressed, the way that I carry myself, if you cannot empathize with me, if you cannot see me for me, then there's no way for us to connect. Unless your style of magic is that you separate yourself from the spectator and you become an anomaly. Now you're a puzzle. In and of itself, there's a mystery to who you are. And then you're going to create this performance around that. And you are the magic. This is the trick. So you have to become the magic. And that's for any public speaking. I recommend that anybody who wants to get into public speaking, or into magic rather, should do public speaking. Ving, he's somebody that's been coming across my YouTube a lot. VIN or VING, I'll have his link down below. So he is somebody that talks about public speaking and how to accentuate yourself in a conversation. If you haven't prepared yourself well enough, then you can find yourself talking really fast and just kind of breezing through everything that you're doing. But if you really understand what it is that you're talking about, you will take your time and you will really accentuate the point. And that is what we're trying to do, trying to get better at everything. This book has sections on how to set up your stage performance. That's practice. Because it's not just about practicing with the cards, it's about practicing with your voice, your oration. So recently I had a comment on a video that I was watching where I said oration. And somebody responded like, how is what he doing like a professional speech or a performance? Or I was like, well, it's on YouTube. He had to turn the camera on and he had to like project to his audience, right? So I consider that a performance-based thing. I consider that an oration, a speech, if you will. So we just need to get better at what we do, and we have to make sure that what we're wearing looks good. For instance, when I saw Magic Beyond Imagination with Garrett Thomas, Cosmo Magic, and Joe Maxwell, they're in the poster behind me here. I took some pictures with them, and I was wearing this, right? And I had my hat on and all that, and in the pictures, I don't look good. And I might not look good now, but I'm highly confident in myself, so I think I look pretty good. But in those pictures, I didn't look great. I knew that. I saw myself, and I just looked, something was missing there. I looked off to me, in my eyes, seeing myself on camera. And yet I stare at myself on camera all the time. So I thought, maybe what I'm wearing isn't really that great. And that's true. Right now, this is red and green. We're talking holidays, but this is like one of my go-to things that I wear. I love the pockets. The way that this hangs loose on me. I can use these pockets for front loading. I can do a lot of stuff with it, and I enjoy it. But does it look good? You see my hair. My hair is darker. It's brown. It sticks out a little bit there as far as how much hair there is. And these colors are dark and goes with that. So you have to consider your attire and make sure that it's not clashing. Make sure you look good. All that stuff that you have to keep in mind, because it's not just about the magic. It's about creating the magic. And that means taking the best part of yourself and projecting it to make it better. For instance, when you're doing music, you have your chest voice and you have your head voice. Some people naturally sing in their head voice. Some people naturally speak or sing in their chest voice. And the difference between that would be, let's say, in terms of vocal, high or low notes. Females tend to be in the upper range. They tend to be a little bit lighter and fluffy. They tend to accentuate those qualities of gentleness, whereas men tend to let things sink down into the chest and they're more solid and grounded. And that's why, elementally speaking, gravitating towards air and water are considered the feminine traits of elements, whereas fire and earth is considered more masculine. And these are flowing things. You flow from one to the other, and you use these qualities to help yourself in your performance. Because again, when you're speaking, if you're speaking at a confident level, you can speak quickly, but not rapidly. Because now you're flowing through your words and you're really just trying to bring the audience together. But then, when the important thing comes up, you're going to slow down. You're going to give them time. For instance, let's say you're doing a trick where, just a very simplistic thing. We have the Jack of Diamonds. We're going to put that right there. You're building suspense. The suspense is building. Let's go ahead and have somebody pick a card. Let's say, that seems about right. 18 down from the top. And we're going to get the Jack of Diamonds. But of course, that was the card you thought was on the table. But that card is actually the Queen of Spades from earlier. Reappeared on the table. So you'll create time in your performance to let the tension build. Just like when you're speaking about a point that is very important, you want that to set in, and you want people to have time to process it. Whereas when you're going through your tricks and you're doing your motions and you're doing all your things, you want to flow like water and air. But when the intensity starts to build, you want to have a crackling fire that's roaring to life. And you want the patience of stone to just take a breath so that they can all see what's happening in front of them and process everything that just happened to try to figure out the puzzle. So that when you show them the impossible, the magical moment can be born. So make sure that you're practicing all the things that you do, not just the cards, not just the coins. Make sure you're practicing your speech, even if you've got to go into a little bit of flowy song. Make sure that you're practicing and you're getting that rhythm down. Then you might want to bring it into something else. Practice the music. Practice the speaking of your voice. Just like they do vocal exercises when they're going to go into singing. You want to warm up your voice. You want to make sure that everything looks good. Make sure you're prepared. And that comes down to your practice, because Josh Norbido, using examples for all these things, he explained that before he went on to Australia's Got Talent, he booked out a dance studio for a week so that he could rehearse his performance. Because if I were going to do a stage performance, I wouldn't do it here. I would need to go out to where I'm performing, or at least something similar, where I have the room to move around and set up the stage, and to kind of set the stage, if you will. And so that way you can practice your performance. Not just the magic, but speaking in a room where you have to project your voice. Maybe there's no sound setup where you're going and you normally use an amplifier. Well, you should probably ask these questions before you get there, because now you have to project your voice in a room that you're not familiar with how to do that. Obviously, if you're street performing, projection of your voice becomes necessary from the get-go, because not everybody allows amplifiers. Adversely, let's say you have a bigger room than you anticipated and you don't have an amplifier, and you can't, there's no way for you to set, so make sure that you can utilize their mic system, figure all that stuff out ahead of time so you don't show up the night before. That way you can plug everything in after you've practiced and rehearsed and talked to them. You want to show up a little bit earlier that day, figure out where your window is, because maybe it's a setup that, maybe you bring all your own stuff, but maybe they don't have plugins where you need them. Or maybe there's this or that and another thing. So you want to show up early so that you can make sure that everything's going to be available to you that you need for your performance. Let's say that you're catering to a specific location where you can't have flashing lights. You can't have an amplifier. You can't have these things. And you show up and you're like, I'm going to get all my stuff out. And they're like, can't do that. This comes down to practice before you perform, and that there's another P word between those two, which is be prepared for what it is that you're doing. Be prepared. Now that's more of a 1.5, okay? 1.5. Now that be prepared is also going to come in again when we get down to here, because we're still talking about practicing. Practice your performance over and over and over and over and over and over until you can do it without even thinking about it. Because then, and only then, that's when you start to get good at it, because then you can do the performance and be you. You can be you in your normal, comfortable zone, because when you go out to perform, you're going to be uncomfortable because it's not comfortable. So what happens is that if you perform so much, practice your performance so much, that it becomes second nature to you, when you go to perform, all those other things that make you uncomfortable, you can start to overcome those things, because you're not worried about what you're going to say next. You're not worried about what you're going to perform next. What you can worry about is connecting with your audience. Investing in your spectators so that they can invest in you. You have to become a part of the audience, a part of the show. Everything is combining and churning together, and you have to connect with them so that they can connect with you. Practice your performance, practice your music, practice your speaking, practice your patter, practice everything. And you get to a certain point, depending on what type of magician you are, depending on what kind of performer you are, speaker you are, that you get to a certain point when you realize that you don't need you need practice, but you won't need to prepare everything 100%, because you'll leave yourself a little wiggle room, especially if some people are very concrete on this. They'll say step 1 to 10. Can't miss anything, have to learn it exactly how it is. But then you fall into this repetitive pattern that will affect your performance, because when you're performing it, people will know that you're scripting, you're reading. Even if you're not reading off a script, you're following a cycle in your head, and this is when you can accentuate yourself to the next level. Because what if a heckler in the crowd says something or does something and disrupted your moment? Distractions, You're supposed to be creating the misdirection, but you don't want the audience to distract you from what you're doing. So once you get good enough at your practice to your performance level, and you do this over and over and over and over again, you can allow yourself to figure out what to do if there is a distraction. So something happens, somebody says something, somebody does something. Piff, the magic dragon, very good at this. He'll stop the show. He'll say, what was that? What'd you say? And then he will heckle them back, or he will create, not everybody will do that, but he has the style where it allows him to turn the spotlight on the spectator and say, let's take a break. Let's see what you have to say. Comedians will do this. They'll say, I wonder if everybody came here today to see you or me. So how about you let me do my job? So they'll call out the spectator. They'll call out the heckler. And if Chris Ramsey has a great video on this where he shows you ways that you can heckle a heckler with your magic and how to turn the tables back on them because they're doing something where they're trying to disperse the illusion. Like, I know how you did your magic. Well, people didn't pay to figure out my magic. They came here to be entertained by the magic that I'm performing. So you have people that are doing puzzles, you have people that are looking at the tricks, and people who are looking for the magical moment. And all these things are coming together and they're culminating again into this giant churning pot that you have to navigate. You're the chef, you're the connoisseur, you're the one that has to control the moment for their imagination. And this is something from Magic and Mind where it says that some people are only coming to your performance to figure out how you're doing it. And once they have an idea of how it's done, you no longer have control of that magical moment. So sometimes you may have to create a magical moment using these individuals so that you can regain possession of that control and that power in the moment. But you want to do it in such a way that you're not going to anger them further. So if you know that they have the personality that if you were to do this, you have to kind of take a step back and you have to just ignore that because you don't want to create further conflict. So again, you have to be a master of the performing arts, not just the magical arts. You have to be able to perform. You have to be able to read people at a level very quickly to know, can I do this trick on them? Because there's a lot of magical trick. There's mentalism. There's a lot of types of tricks that would require you to work with a spectator who is open to the possibility of what it is that you're performing. That being said, you have to make sure you're picking your spectator well, because if you're picking somebody out of the audience and they're going to go against what you're doing, you'll do some soft tests to figure out who's going to play along and who's not. And playing along doesn't necessarily mean they're in on the magic. It just means that you can perform to them without them trying to rebuke you or fight against it. So be prepared in your practice, be prepared in your performance, perform everything, practice everything in your performance. Make sure that you're not just practicing the magic, make sure you're practicing the music, the sound, the oration, the speaking. Make sure you're practicing your dress. Don't show up to rehearsal not dressed in what you're going to wear the next day, because you might find out that something clashes, something doesn't quite work. Practice everything. Make sure it's ready that day. Make sure that's it's there, because you don't want to wake up and be like, oh, I don't have this thing. I have to wear something else, and now you don't have the right pockets. You haven't practiced in it. You haven't performed in the space in it, because you might find that when you're walking around into this space, maybe something that you're wearing, like for instance, let's say I'm wearing this around and it's breezy outside, and now this is blowing around, but you haven't practiced outside. You got to be prepared for the elements that are now conspiring against you. So be aware of all these things and practice in the space that you're going to be performing in, or at least try to recreate those elements that you might have to worry about. Again, I'll use Josh Nobito as an example. He's performing magic, a walk-around magic at a catering event, and so he's trying to perform magic to people at a table, and the waiters, the catering, walks in front of him to get stuff at the table, and he's like, you're constantly competing with the food service, the staff, because they're providing a service and you're providing a service and you're clashing with each other. So he'll quickly jump into a different routine. He'll do some, maybe you can introduce some sponge balls while they're there, or maybe you can drop the card into their apron, or you can really make them a part of the moment so that people are now seeking attention with you again. And just read the room. Figure out how it's going to work with you. Those are the considerations that we have there. Great stuff here. Very beautiful. Again, can't get over this enough. Practice everything, not just your magic. Practice speaking. Practice, if you're going to use music, make sure that you're prepared when you're going to perform, because you're practicing your performance, everything. You're practicing people, you're practicing chairs, tables, where everything's going to be set up, how you're navigating the room, where you're going to be standing, so that if you perform something over here, people aren't going to miss it over here. These are all these things that you have to keep in mind when you're in your performance stage, because you want to make sure that you're controlling the element. Because when let's say you're street performing and you're in like the center of a square, people can walk behind you, people can walk in front of you. So as you're performing, you really have to be mindful of the fact that, as Jason Mars pointed out, part of your show, some of the great magic that you can perform is very angle sensitive. And so he's like, this show's great for the guys over here, but the people over here, they're not. It's not so much magic for them because everything's exposed to them. So you have to really tighten up those angles and maybe make jokes about certain performances and things like that. So when you're performing for an audience that you can set up the tables and you can kind of control where you want people, especially if you're doing a party in a conference room or something like that, you can get in there and you can navigate that whole space and control that moment so that there's no flashing. I mean, accidental flashes happen, but there's no angle sensitive locations, because you know where you need to stand to perform certain things and you know where everybody's going to be. So just know that knowledge going into it and prepare for that. So let's talk about the performance and let's talk about promoting. So performance and promoting are important because after you've made your performance, if you can record it or if they've recorded it, see if you can get a copy of that, or take that and take some really strong moments from that, some things that you really make sure everything's good and make sure the performance was solid. Like I've uploaded my entire performance on here that I did recently, and it wasn't great in terms, like there was a lot of things that I would just cut out completely. But if you've got a performance that you rocked at and you're like, this is pretty solid, you're probably going to have some moments that were a little weaker, but you're going to have some moments that you like spectators, beautiful, magical moments. Take those, bring them out, do some B-roll with them, and put those up on your website or on your channel, or just lead with those. And then as you're performing, make sure that you're tweaking your performances to get rid of those weaker moments and only having a solid routine as you're going along. And that's where you're going to be prepared for your promotion, because promotion will cycle back to practice, because you're going to get practice performing, you're going to practice promoting, and you're going to know what to promote to certain audiences. Because some people might be more interested in this type of magic, and some people might be more interested in this type of magic, because stage performance and walk around is a little bit different. Some of the tricks might be the same, but if you're performing grand illusions as you're walking around, you can't really bring a box around with you, a cart and all that. You're going to be doing that on stage. But if people want a stage performer and you're a walk-around magician, you need to make sure that you're promoting properly to whoever you're promoting to, and make sure that if you are going to switch genres of the type of performance that you do, make sure that you're practicing that way, way, way more, and make sure you're promoting that properly to figure out what it is that they want. Because if they call you and they're like, hey, this is what I want, and you're like, your space doesn't really allow that type of performance, do you have a different venue in mind? Really just practice that and know your game, know your field, know exactly what it is that you provide, so that you can let them know and get as much of that information up front as possible, and just keep practicing and being prepared. Because again, promoting to practice, you want to be prepared to practice what you're promoting, so that when you perform, that they're getting what they paid for. If they want something else, make sure you're practicing that, because people are only going to hire you based on what you're promoting. So you could be practicing some really solid magic, but then you could be promoting from a performance that was different things. So I think we'll use Houdini as an example for this. He got started out in somewhat of like mentalism and seances and things like that. So we had a very strong understanding of how a lot of that stuff worked. So he would use that later in life. But he liked regular magic. He liked card magic. Most magicians at the time would say that he wasn't especially strong in that field, but he enjoyed that more than anything else. However, as soon as he started doing escape artist stuff, the audience wanted more and more and more of that, and his managers and production, like that's what they pushed because that's what was selling. And so he started becoming an escape artist, which meant that he had to build up his muscles and his body to perform some of those, to perform some of the escape acts, which meant that when he went back to do card stuff and things like that, he may not be as dexterous because he had to be stronger and fitter, and so he found it a little bit more difficult to do some of that other stuff. Some of that might be a little bit inaccurate, but for the majority of that story, that's just clipping and cut and pasting some of that stuff together. And so he had this really, this resentment for doing escape art and stuff, because that's not what his passion was, but that's what made the money. And there's also stories of him stealing certain things, but I think that's always been the story with a lot of major acts, especially back then. You see part of The Illusionist, but you see the Grand. It's got Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman. I'll think about it here in a second, but it's a big magic movie. They're stealing stuff back and forth. There's all this stuff happening. He's creating. I won't give away. Won't give away the ending if you haven't seen it. I'll probably think about it here in a little bit. But either way, that's the idea, is that stealing back and forth has always been the big cliche, but it probably happened to some extent. When you're creating rivalries between two people, if somebody's overly successful, you want to figure out what they're doing so you can either reproduce it or create something better or expose them without getting in trouble so that they lose following and you gain following. So that's the back and forth hash out thing there. But let's talk about moving on from the promotion to practice. Practice all of this. Practice your performance. Practice your promotion. You want to perform what you're going to be promoting so that you're promoting what you're practicing. And be prepared all the way through. Strongly recommend Maximum Entertainment 2.0. This book is not about magic tricks. This book is about performing magic and creating magical moments. Yeah. Show your best side. Treat the props with respect. Careful where you step. Just some of these titles that are in here. Avoid dead time. Missed direction. Let's just read a little snippet of that. The load of the lemon. You can already guess where that would go. The ditch of the billet, the pass. In many magic routines, there comes that moment when you do something sneaky. That shouldn't be a problem because as a magician, you have developed a basic understanding of misdirection. Why then do we see so many performers execute the move at exactly the wrong moment when all eyes are on them? So let's talk about briefly, again, the median. And this is a really tough one for me, and this is almost hypocritical as I think about this. Because we just talked about making sure that you're practicing what you're performing, but make sure that you're not crossing genres with your promotion. So for instance, some of the stuff that I perform on the channel should only be done in live performance. Like if I were going out and buying certain magical props that are great for this, where I'm just like, haha, watch this. You know what I'm talking about. If you're only seeing it in this medium, it's gonna sell, it's gonna fly, it's gonna be amazing. Because it's designed to be performed in a one-dimensional space like this. I mean, there's multiple dimensions here, but the idea is that you're only seeing it from one direction. It's one to one. Unless you have like 5 people there right now, you're still only seeing it from this angle, and it's going to be great. And I can perform that easily here. But when I'm doing an angle-sensitive or a performance piece that relies on misdirection or relies on the performance aspect and using the moments properly, it can be very hard to create misdirection when you can stare at the whole screen and watch or pause or repeat or do whatever. So keeping in mind that some of the stuff that I do, if I feel like I performed it properly and you still kind of like figure it out because you're like, oh well, progression, or I've watched it, and I've even said in a couple of videos, I'm like, make sure that you go back and tell me down below like how many times you had to watch this video to figure it out, because if you had to watch it more than 4 or 5 times, you really, it wasn't me that gave it away, it was your interpretation of the puzzle that allowed you to dissect it. If you watch it the first, second, third time through and you're like, I'm not really sure what's happening, but then you really go back and you pause it and you freeze frame and you stretch it out and you kind of see those little moments, that was technology that did that, not, so I think that that's something to keep in mind, that when you're watching some of these performances, yes, I want to get better. And this goes back to the idea that I know I suck. I know I'm terrible. It's kind of like an episode of SpongeBob when he's like, I'm ugly and I'm proud. He had bad breath. So keep that in mind. Take that away as an analogy that's very important to this, which is, you may think that your problem is here, but your problem is actually over here. You might think you're ugly because everybody's running away, but it's actually because you have bad breath because of the salad or the sundae that you ate earlier. So keeping in mind that if I watch the videos that I did a year ago, it's gross. It's bad. Why did I ever post this? I can see everything. I know exactly what I'm doing. I can't speak properly to the camera. I'm not really flowing very well. And when I watch videos that I do now, like this video, for instance, or a lot of other stuff that I performed, I'm happy with the progress. Not just contented. I'm downright floored by the difference of how well I'm performing now versus last year. Which means, and as I just said multiple times, I suck. I'm still terrible. So what does that mean for the future? It means that when I watch my videos next year and I compare them to what I'm doing now versus what I'm doing then, if I'm seeing the same improvement, if I'm seeing the same percentage of improvement over last year's videos to this year's, and I'm watching them next year, and I'm watching the videos I'm doing right now, and if I see the same amount of improvement, we're getting somewhere, and I'm climbing up the ladder. And that's what's important. That is what is important. Continue to strive to do better. And remember, always remember, besides the 3 P's, practice, perform, promote, make sure that you're repeating this process in an endless cycle. And stay positive, stay active, and stay awesome. And we'll see you in the next one.